mindful of everybody's time. He might begin in the name of God, who is most merciful. Thank you all for joining us. My name is Chauvin, office in Maryland. And a virtual news conference was called with Maryland Muslim leaders to offer reaction to the jury's 3-count guilty verdict. As we know, that was announced yesterday in Derek Chauvin's trial for the murder of George Floyd last May. The charges, as we know, are second-degree murder, third-degree murder, and second-degree manslaughter. CARE's office in Maryland is deeply relieved and encouraged by the jury's decision to convict Derek Chauvin. We believe it's a turning point for a new chapter of accountability and restoration in America. But it's not merely the end of the work to build a more just and equitable nation. We know that our country has a long history of discriminatory and deadly policing practices that disproportionately impact especially Black communities. And here in Maryland on Monday, we marked 6 years since Freddie Gray was killed in police custody in Baltimore. For too long, our nation has grappled with and tolerated the murders of Black and brown people at the hands of law enforcement with relative impunity. Yesterday's decision was a pivotal moment of accountability. It was a clear message for change, but justice would mean culpability for lives taken at the hands of police. It would mean the end of disparate treatment of Black and brown communities. It would mean investing in our communities, not in policing. And it would mean that Gianna Floyd would have her daddy with her today. It was Frederick Douglass who said that power concedes nothing without demand. And the demands of the Floyd family, the prosecution team led by Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison, and the global community of advocates and activists proved that the power is with the people. God willing, this case will set a critical legal precedent for other victims and survivors of police violence. Our hearts and prayers are especially with the Floyd family and with Minnesotans. No verdict will bring back the man that they lived. We need to legislate change to make policing fair and safe for all. At the state level, Maryland made historic progress on policing reforms this year, including repealing the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights. CARE was proud to join the Maryland Coalition for Justice and Police Accountability to ensure that the 5 demands that we were making for police reforms in our state were being acted on by lawmakers. On the federal level, we urge our communities to help usher in change by contacting our representatives in Congress and urging them to pass the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act. True justice needs to be legislated, and we will continue to fight for meaningful change at every level of the government for George Floyd, for Freddie Gray, for Dante Wright, Breonna Taylor, and so many more until lasting justice is served. And with that, we would like to invite the first speaker. We have Imam Talib Abdul Samad from Irhasa, please. The floor is yours.
And Ramadan Mubarak. I would like to begin first by praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and recognizing there's nothing worthy of worship except Him. And then our Prophet Muhammad is His last messenger to all of mankind. Secondly, I would like to extend our heartfelt appreciation to all those who have made this day possible, particularly the 12 jurors who looked at the Although the family have received some financial settlement and now have received a long-awaited verdict of guilty on all charges, truly that could never bring back their loved one and our dear brother to his family or his children. Our holy book states clearly, whosoever kills a person, it shall be as if he has killed all of mankind. George Floyd did not die in vain. It was due to this unfortunate circumstance that has brought about one of the greatest movements of police reform in the history of this nation. It was this horrific incident that led to a global movement under the banner and cry, Black Lives Matter. I know many of us have sat on pins and needles waiting for the verdict. For some, it was a bittersweet. Although this nation is beginning to realize the need for police reform and accountability, we still have an uphill battle with those who want to continue business as usual regarding the disparity of justice. It is law enforcement officers like Chauvin that has tarnished the respect of this institution, that is given the responsibility to protect, serve, and defend all the citizens regardless of race and ethnicity. When I was a child, there was a program called Officer Friendly, where you were approached by a handshake and a smile, but today you are met with a gun and handcuffs. We must demand immediate changes in the arrest practices, as well as renewed training on how to de-escalate hostile situations. I believe that every sworn officer should have their records reviewed, and those that have been identified as a threat to the safety of the public be removed from such a respectful and essential position. Again, this is only the beginning. It is not the end. And as a Muslim, we are taught to stand up and speak against injustice and confront it wherever it sticks its ugly head up. We are not in this battle alone. The world has recognized the need for change and peace, safety, and the future of this nation we all call home. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam, rahmatullah wa barakatuh.
Thank you so much, Imam Khalid,
Alhamdulillah.
for those powerful, powerful words. Next, we'd like to have Brother Damani Ingram to the floor is yours, please.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. You know, my initial reaction, of course, to the verdict were similar to many of us out there who were elated and relieved, but at the same time, understanding that this is just a starting point. I think the issue that we face with police brutality is, of course, dealing with the training of these police officers, the laws that have protected the police officers over the years when it comes to how they encounter citizens, how they encounter suspects, what levels of force is permissible. These objective standards that have been used and repeatedly echoed in trials, civil and criminal. We have some Supreme Court cases of the Graham versus Connor cases where we have an objectively reasonable standard when we try to scrutinize the conduct of police officers that often lets them off the hook, allowing them to have deference, more deference than your common man or woman would have in the street when it comes to their conduct. One of the things I also thought about, and it comes to mind, is that not only do we have to continue to be active civilly in our protests, legislative-wise, so critically important. We see why the importance of having someone like Brother Keith Ellison, who was able to take the initiative to assemble a prosecution team that he felt would be able to get this job done. You know, police brutality, police misconduct has been, of course, a part of this nation since its beginnings. The genesis of the police units, how they were deployed into our inner cities to protect the wealth, the systems, the housing, that was supported by our government is something that, you know, we can do a whole paper and thesis on how we got to this point. But one of the things that I've always thought about too, that I think is important for us to think about, which may not be as commonly discussed, is the importance of changing the narrative of how we approach and view, how police approach and view people who are brown or folks that are other than white. I call it, you know, like the 3Ds. Like, we're working on these 3Ds. What are the 3Ds I think are important? One of the things, and this is something we deal with on a social standpoint, is how we're portrayed in the media, in the radio and television, the demonization of anyone who may be Black, the dehumanization of anyone who is not white, the deification of someone who is white in their skin. And all those things have a perspective of how these officers, how people are being portrayed, and we see it often in the news. So what I wanted to say is that I was extremely pleased. We know this is the first step. We got a road to go. We have to continue in the level of activity and fighting against some of the norms that have been put in place for us out there, for all folks of color, all folks who are concerned about the injustices out there. But as an attorney, I see this in our criminal justice system. I see this even within the jury pools. I see how the misperceptions are used. I see the deference that are given to officers, many times unfairly. But we do know that there are a lot of good officers out there, plenty of great folks in our criminal justice system and in our civil justice system. But we see that the system can work. We got a lot of work to do. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you so much, Brother Damani. Our next speaker is going to be Sister Ilhan Calgary from the Silver Spring Justice Coalition.
Thank you, Zainab. My name is Ilhan Calgary, and I just want to explain how the Silver Spring Justice Coalition came to be. About 2.5 years ago, a gentleman by the name of Robert White, middle-aged African-American male, who lives just a few blocks down from my house, was taking a walk in his neighborhood, broad daylight. This was a daily walk. There happened to be a police officer in the neighborhood on some other reason, for some other reason. And his video camera shows, his body cam shows that he got out of his car with his gun drawn as soon as he saw Mr. White. So he starts chasing Mr. White down. Mr. White is saying, "Why are you chasing me? Why are you chasing me?" Well, you can imagine how that ended up. That police officer ended up shooting Mr. White 8 times, and Mr. White was killed. This is a man, a neighbor of mine, killed for walking in his neighborhood while Black. Well, what happened to that police officer is nothing. He's still on the police force. And this is what the state of affairs, or was the state of affairs in Maryland. And the reason we had this is because of the law enforcement officers' Bill of Rights, which the Maryland legislature repealed just last week, which protected law enforcement officers. And this was the beginning of the Silver Spring Justice Coalition to try to bring some kind of protection, some kind of accountability to police, and to bring protection to our Black and Brown residents of this county, our neighbors. Since Mr. Black's death, several other people have been killed by police. Just recently, Kwamina Okran was killed by 4 police officers in Gaithersburg, Maryland. They didn't have uniforms on. They were ununiformed civilian clothed officers, and they killed him. And this is going on and on. What was really important to me about the verdict yesterday, aside from the fact that it had to happen, there's no way that logically it could not have happened, is that what Attorney General Keith Ellison said, where he said people are talking about these police being bad apples. These are bad apples, and we need to rid the system of bad apples. Well, in fact, it's the system that's bad. It doesn't matter what kind of people we get into that system. We can get good police into the system, but when the system is set up to oppress and to target and to be violent against people of color, then it's not going to matter what your initial feelings are, because you're in a system that is set up that way. So when we're talking about police change, we're not talking about reform. We're talking about real change in policing, where we reimagine what policing has to look like. Because if you look at the roots of policing in the United States, it's based on a very, very racist system. It's based on, keeping Black people down, keeping Black people oppressed, keeping Black people intimidated. And until we change that system, until we come to terms with that system, we're not going to have real change in this country. And everybody in this country who wants justice, everybody in this country who believes that this country has something to offer in terms of a good place to live for people, a place that will allow everybody to live in safety, has to look at the roots of policing, has to look at real changes in policing, and has to push for changes in policing so that these things stop happening. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ilhan, for those powerful remarks. Next, we're going to have Brother Jameel Johnson from the Prince George's County Muslim Council, please. The floor is yours.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Ramadan Mubarak to everyone, and peace to everyone listening or who will have opportunity to listen to this. Sister Zainab Chowdhury, thank you very much for your leadership on these issues and that of Care Maryland. The anger at George Floyd's death at the hands of police was the culmination of not only 2 other recent deaths, Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor, but that of unarmed Blacks that were unjustly killed by white Americans. It was symbolic of hundreds of years of brutalization of Black bodies at the hands of white supremacists. References were made to the murder of 14-year-old Emmett Till in 1955 by white supremacists who were never held accountable. But just as the Till murder was a catalyst of the civil rights movement, the death of George Floyd was followed by continuing cries of Black Lives Matter, justice, and equality, which resounded globally and in numerous spheres of influence, such as professional sports, and in corporate America. Yesterday, the world witnessed the accountability that we hoped for when a diverse jury found Derek Chauvin guilty on all 3 counts. But just as our Attorney General of Minnesota said, yes, accountability, if not justice. The verdict will not give Floyd back his life. It will not return a brother to a brother or a father to a daughter. And as we know, as Muslims, ultimate justice is preserved to judges with perfect knowledge. He who is al-adl, the embodiment of justice. But I think one of the things this also shows here, I do believe it is an opportunity for officers to know that the tide may be changing. Their actions will not go unnoticed and unpunished. They will have to consider the next steps that they take. And I'm not saying this is going to change things overnight, because it never does. You cannot have hundreds of years of the undervaluing of Black lives and the over authority of police officers and think that one verdict is going to change that. That's just not reality. But I think it sets a signal that change is coming. And one point that I want to make is, we mentioned our brother, Attorney General Keith Ellison, first Muslim to be elected to Congress. There are those who are still concerned about whether or not the Muslim community should be politically involved. Yet the fact of the matter is, if this brother had not run for Congress, if he had not run for Attorney General, we know that the local county prosecutor was about to botch this case. So if he had not stepped up in the name of justice, we would not have had the accountability that we witnessed yesterday. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will put people in the places that but we have to make their choices, whether it be elected office or as individuals, to step up and become involved. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum salam.
Next, our speaker is Maryland State Delegate Bilal Ali.
Assalamu alaikum. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Ramadan Mubarak. I'm representing the Muslim Culture Center and Masjid Ihsan in Baltimore. First, I would like to extend my heartfelt condolences to the Floyd family. I do believe that the verdict was just and fair, but the verdict is by no means an exoneration of the justice system or police practice in America. This is just part 1. We still have 3 more trials to endure, which I feel the other police officers are equally culpable and are very much complicit in George Floyd's death. I'm cautiously optimistic that a just verdict will be rendered in the other 3 pending cases. As a community, we have seen these type of police abuse played out for far too long, from Rodney King to Freddie Gray in Baltimore. I'm hopeful that Congress will pass the George Floyd Police Reform Act. This would be a step in the right direction. Jazakallah khairan.
Thank you, Brother Bilal. Our next speaker is Hannah Zaberi from Justice for All.
Thank you so much, Zainab. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Justice for All welcomes the verdict in the George Floyd murder case. Justice for George Floyd is a hard-won reality powered by the efforts of organizers and protesters who brought the world's attention to this case. It is a win for human rights in the United States, but there are thousands more waiting justice, thousands such as the Maryland families of Tyrone Jones, Archie Elliott, Antoine Black, and many others. From the streets of Minneapolis to the corners of Shaheen Bagh, India, unlawful use of force by police can end in death, injury, and devastation. Police brutality is a human rights issue. As we've seen too many times in the United States and around the world, sometimes police kill or seriously injure people during these arrests fueled by racism. Strict international laws and standards govern how and when police can use force, particularly lethal force. The United Nations Basic Principles on the Use of Force and Firearms by Law Enforcement Officials is the key international instrument that deals with police use of force. These must be adhered to in the United States. The most important thing to remember in this, it is the utmost obligation of state authorities, including police, to respect and protect the right to life. Under international law, police officers should only ever use lethal force as a last resort. This means such force is strictly necessary to protect themselves or others from imminent threat of death or serious injury, and only when other options for de-escalation are insufficient. This was clearly not the case in this case. Many killings by police that we've seen around the world clearly do not meet this criteria, and political leaders in places like Brazil and the Philippines openly celebrate harsh police tactics, even murder. In the United States, many Black residents are unarmed when they were killed by police. George Floyd, Michael Brown, Breonna Taylor, Eric Garner. The world knows of this troubling pattern, and this makes it harder for us to work towards human rights in other countries. When they ask us, what about your own backyard? They ask, seeking to weaken human rights arguments we make about persecution of Uyghur Muslims in China, for example. China just released a human rights abuses report on the United States, and that should put us to shame. So I will end it there. We agree with President Biden's statement that the work has just begun. Police reform must include cultural changes within each department, so officers truly recognize that all human beings share the same level of humanity. Until this system can be destroyed and abolished, verdicts are measures of individual accountability. They don't bring back the dead. They don't protect the living. There needs to be policy changes at city, state, and federal level. And yes, there needs to be better training, better communications with communities, and funding for social services and opportunities for communities of color. But above all, we need real accountability built into any system. Justice for all instead of mass incarceration for all.
Thank you so much, Sister Hannah. Our next speaker is going to be Brother Moses Hamid from Masjid al-Haq.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Ramadan Mubarak. Just a few words. I just want to thank Dr. Shadre and Cash for putting this press conference together. But overall, with the guilty the guilty on all charges of former officer Derek Chavez, I pray that this brings some comfort to the Floyd family, because like every day they have to live with this trauma of seeing their loved one murdered, and they have to continue to live with this not only through the next few trials, but for eternity. As long as those images are there, this family have to live with that trauma. As a Muslim, as an African American Muslim, I'm happy that the justice system worked this time. But however, the injustice of people of color and so many people of color have been, and these injustices have been shielded by blue and white, and is no longer the case with the advent of cell phones and social media. Many of these atrocities are being captured. And so no longer can these rogue police get away with the shooting and asking detail later, and with no accountability for their actions. I pray that this trial would help that process of restoring the morality and the accountability to the criminal justice system and policing, and this behavior. I just think that the day of reckoning is here and accountability is here. And just the motto of serve and protect. We want to make sure that motto is not only applied to neighborhoods of color, but to neighborhoods of color being able to live in a sense of security, that the police would also service our community as they serve white communities. So, Jazakallah Khair for allowing me to give my thoughts.
Thank you so much, Brother Moses. Our next speaker is going to be Dr. Humaira Zaid from the ACLU of Maryland.
Thank you, Zainab. Salam alaikum and Ramadan Mubarak. My name is Humaira Ziad. I direct the program in Islamic Studies at Hopkins, and I'm here as the Vice President of the Board of the ACLU of Maryland. I start by extending my deepest condolences to the family of George Floyd. No family anywhere should go through this pain, and yet they continue to do so every day at every moment in our country and around the world. The jury verdict convicting Derek Chauvin of murdering George Floyd mattered. It was a small win for police accountability and may help heal a grieving community. But the systems that allowed George to be murdered, that ripped him away from his family and the communities that loved him so much, remain fully intact. True justice would mean, as so many of us have said today, that George Floyd was never killed in the first place. In fact, it was the first time in Minnesota state history that a white police officer was held accountable for killing a Black man, if we think about the injustice of that reality. The system of white supremacy that justified Chauvin's murderous actions and worked overtime to defend him remains unchecked. That is why we saw at almost the exact same time, police in Columbus, Ohio shot and killed Ma'Khia Bryant, a child. Across the country and here in Maryland, in order for Black lives to truly matter and be protected, we must build systems of transparency, accountability, and community control of the police who are supposed to serve them. The ACLU of Maryland and the Maryland Coalition for Justice and Police Accountability, many folks who are present right now here in this call, 95 organizations statewide, celebrate the successful organizing that advanced police transparency and accountability, but we know that Maryland's historic police reform package still does not meet the moment. While the General Assembly repealed the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights, it failed to implement the most important element of police accountability, community oversight. Community oversight means that there is a community-controlled and operated entity that is external to the police department or state-imposed processes that has power to investigate, adjudicate, and impose discipline. The work to reimagine policing has not ended. We will continue to work with communities to shift power into the hands of those who are over-policed and abusively policed. We must ensure police are not the only resort for addressing harm. We all deserve to be truly safe. As Muslims, every instance of unchecked abuse of power should wound us to our very core. We are inheritors of the legacy of a prophet who built his mission around the empowerment of the most disenfranchised in his own community, who spoke truth to power every minute of his life to bring about justice, and who created structural change that impacted the way in which not just Muslims, but all humanity understood the imperative for justice. We must be advocating as a religious community and as a religious value to end the way policing is done in our nation and to set up accountability structures that have every person's liberation at their core. Thank you and salam alaikum, and thank you for all your work.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ziad. And our final speaker is going to be Sheikh Earl from the Islamic Center of Maryland, who's going to also be concluding with a dua or a prayer. And again, before he speaks, I just want to encourage our communities to call our members of Congress and encourage them to pass the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. It's really critical that we hear your voices, that they hear your voices, and we legislate true justice and true change in our society. Sheikh Chad, the floor is yours. Jazakumullah khair.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Ramadan Mubarak. Hope everyone is well. Thank you so much, Sister Zainab and Care Maryland for organizing this event. One of the prayers that our teachers taught us was, "Oh Allah, oh God, make our today better than our yesterday." and our tomorrow better than our today. And in the month of Ramadan, that's what we're trying to accomplish on a personal level, on a spiritual level. But that dua that prayer is so much deeper than that. That prayer is a prayer which affects families. It affects societies. You know, we hope that our police are better police today than they were yesterday. That they go out and serve our communities better than they did yesterday, with a greater sense of duty and justice and service to our communities. We hope our legal system, you know, our judges and our lawyers are better today than they were yesterday, and they're better tomorrow than they were today. This is our hope, and you know, yesterday was a small victory, and we can celebrate that small victory and ask you know, ask God that this is a continuation of something greater to come. And you know, the act in Congress, the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, is a good step in the right direction. But it comes down to the human being and their you know, their heart. You know, the issue of racism is always going to return to the heart of the human being and their how they see themselves compared to others. And are we better than others? Are we do we humble ourselves and serve others? You know, and this religion uplifts people. It uplifts people who are oppressed, and it uplifts the oppressor by removing the oppression from his heart and the hate from his heart and the racism from his heart or her heart. So we hope and pray that this is a step in the right direction, and this is a moment that we might pause and say years from now, that was a turning point in our society, and God knows best how things will turn out. But you know, I believe that, you know, my faith teaches me to be optimistic, that people can change. When people find guidance, they can change, and people find truth, they can change if they're willing to take the step forward, inshallah, God willing. So I'll end I'm very, I have my timer running, Sister Zainab, because I know sometimes I talk too much. Imams talk too much, right? I'll end with a quick dua. Oh Allah, allow us to be better today than we were yesterday. Oh Allah, allow us to be better tomorrow than we are today. Oh Allah, allow us to be bearers of truth and justice. Allow us to be lights in a time of extreme darkness. Allow healing for the family of George Floyd and all those who have been affected by this oppression. Allow us to be a nation which lives by its truths and it lives by its principles. Allow us to be a nation which is an example for the world of what society can be. Allow us to be better, Ya Allah. Ameen Ya Rabbal Alamin. Salaam.
Ameen Ya Rabbil Alameen. Jazakumullah khair, Sheikh Chad. And thank you again to all of our speakers who joined us today on short notice. For the powerful remarks and the powerful reflections. We're honored to have you, and we will have a recording of this available afterwards for you to distribute as well. Jazakumullah khair.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Salaam.